This harp that I sing and play with is the early Irish harp, or the historical Irish harp. This is the type of harp that was played in Ireland for over 800 years, from at least the 11th century right through to the end of the 18th century, when unfortunately the whole tradition died out. This is the harp that's the national symbol of Ireland. It's the President of Ireland's seal. It's on our Irish coins. It's on your pint of Guinness. And there are 18 of these harps still extant. This particular harp that I'm playing is a student copy from the Historical Harp Society of an 18th century harp called the Mullaghmast harp, which is in storage in the National Museum of Ireland in Collins Barracks. A little bit about the construction of this harp. Perhaps the most obvious feature is the wire strings, generally brass strings. The sound box was very often one piece of wood hollowed out to create a large sound box, and then with a back of one other piece of wood with some hole in order for you to change a string if a string broke. And there are toggles inside here at the end of the strings. And here we have simple tuning pegs, and they're tuned with a tuning key, just a simple mechanism, and there are no levers. There are two G strings right next to each other, just below middle C, in the tenor range, these two strings, and they were called the collie, or the lying together, gentrified in the English language to the sisters. And nobody really knows what was the purpose of these two notes of the same pitch. Perhaps it was to aid tuning of the upper and lower range on the harp. Because they're metal strings, there's a beautiful resonance, but it's also has a long resonance. And the earlier Irish harp in earlier centuries, the harpers played with long fingernails. By the 18th century, they were mostly playing with the pads of their fingers. But even still, the resonance is very long, so playing it involves a lot of damping of the strings, which makes it a little bit harder to play. The further back in the centuries we go, the smaller the harp was. We have beautiful surviving examples of the medieval Irish harp, or Gaelic harp, with the Trinity harp on public display in Trinity College Library in Dublin. And we have the Queen Mary harp in Edinburgh. But we don't actually know what was the music that was played on those older harps. They played for the bardic poetries. We have some of that bardic poetry has survived, but not the music, because it was an oral tradition. But when we come to the 17th and 18th century, we are in much better position to reconstruct the music, largely due to the work of a young teenager called Edward Bunting. He was a great organist, a bit of a musical genius, and he was employed to transcribe the playing of the old Irish harpers. They were the last of the harpers at the end of the 18th century. There were no new young harpers coming up, and he was employed to write it down as they played, and he did that, and we still have his field notebooks from the Belfast Harp meeting in 1792 and other transcriptions he did of the old harpers. It became his life's passion, and he spent his life collecting and publishing the music. Bunting's transcriptions of the old Irish harpers' music and Carlin's music are in Queen's University Belfast in the special collections there, and it's a wonderful resource. My focus is on the music of Carlin at the moment, and like the other early Irish harpers, he would have travelled around the countryside on horseback. He was blind. A lot of the harpers were blind. It was considered a dignified and respectable profession to go into if you were blind, and he would have been accompanied by a sighted guide, and he would have visited his patrons in various houses in Ireland. There would have been the old Irish Gaelic aristocracy, and by Carlin's time the English landed gentry, the English settlers also, and he would have written songs in praise of each of the patrons and been given great hospitality in all the houses. Carlin's music would have been largely a song repertoire. He wrote the songs in praise of his patrons and then went and sang them, accompanying himself with the harp. And this would have been typical of the early Irish harpers. And that's kind of forgotten these days, that it was a song repertoire. So that's what I try and do, is reconstruct the songs and the words with the music. And Carlin greatly admired the Baroque composers of his day, so Corelli and Vivaldi and Gimignani. And Carlin's genius was to combine the Baroque elements that he loved with his native tradition, the native Irish tradition, to create a wonderful hybrid music that's still very popular even to this day. In 2002, Siobhan Armstrong founded the Historical Harp Society of Ireland, and this is a wonderful organisation that is really spearheading the revival of the early Irish harp. They commission makers to make student copies of the harp, such as this one. They teach the students on these harps. They run a wonderful summer school called Scoil na Glóirseach, which happens in Kilkenny every summer. They have a library. They do a lot of research on the harps themselves, doing replica models, and on the music, really reconstructing the music of the old Irish harpers. Thank you for listening. I'm Eibhlís Ní Ríordáin. Thank you.
Is Miriam trachter ook mi hurg, is oisle gianulug ni escor, de wiesens an male kun lochriach am buich gur kassig me loivle, is erox is trehoch am weiden jasko vanta, grogrin a heren perle das galanta, olige trims na dienige falli, vahoren fanny min davi. Shudi an alla teivle kun, as luite faring edagra, she fanny as janul den lis nenul, for more come